TopMedTalk. So it's Monty Mythen here, Editor-in-Chief of TopMedTalk. Welcome back to Euroanesthesia 2023, the annual meeting of the European Society of Anaesthesia and Intensive Care here in Glasgow in Scotland. It's been a wonderful meeting. It's the morning of day 3. We're back in the trade exhibition. So if you can hear a little bit of hubbub around us, including some banging noises coming from the baristas who are preparing for the crowds to arrive to see all the wonderful things in this exhibition, then apologise for the extra noise. Now, we're missing Desiree Chappell, my co-editor-in-chief. Desiree's just off to the airport to join her family for a short holiday in France. Desiree, thank you for all your hard work in the last few days. Also delighted now to be joined by some guests on the Medtronic stand here in the trade exhibition, where we're going to be discussing something which I thought was a topic that we had nothing more to say about. So I'm going to introduce our guests in series, starting with very dear friend Ellen O'Sullivan. Ellen, it's wonderful to see you again.
Nice to be here, Monty.
Can you tell us a little bit more about yourself? I know you very well, but for those of you who, there may be a few out there who don't know you, a little bit more.
I'm Ellen O'Sullivan, and I'm a consultant in St James's Hospital in Dublin in Ireland, having done all my training in the UK, in fact. And I have an interest in airway management because a lot of my work is head and neck and maxillofacial anaesthesia. And I've been involved in the Difficult Airway Society for many years, and I was president of that. And we're here enjoying Euroanesthesia, and there's lots of airway management sessions, and it's been a fantastic meeting.
As we're saying, the balance of the meeting has been such that we seem to have had more time to spend together. Is that you are associated with the organisation of this meeting? How's that happened?
I think it's been fantastic. First of all, the numbers are up, which is great to hear, and they're kind of less parallel sessions, I think. So there's more interaction with the speakers, yes. And I think that's very important. I think we all need to be together. When you have a lot of parallel sessions, you lose sometimes maybe the heart of the meeting. Yes,
because a lot of the sessions have been packed, which is great. I'm guessing none of them have been near empty, which happens occasionally, not because the content's not great, but you've got to make difficult choices. But also the really dramatic difference is the way they've set up the intermingling of the opportunities to socialise in between the Trade Exhibition Centre, the posters which are in a separate zone but open plan, and the other areas means that we've seen loads of people, sort of disproportionately higher number than usual, I would suggest.
Yeah, I think so, and I think the fact that there's lots of baristas around within the trade.
Coffee speaks to anaesthesia, is that right?
Absolutely.
Coffee speaks loudly to anaesthesia. So Ellen, diving into today's subject, which I mentioned, which is videolaryngoscopy, and just to remind people who aren't in our business, traditionally for a long number of years we used a device to place an endotracheal tube put into the mouth to allow us to look at the vocal cords, to place an endotracheal tube or whatever we were doing in there. And it wasn't enabled with video technology, it wasn't enabled with fibre optics. And more recently, and now it's quite a long time ago, the obvious thing happened where modern technology enabled a camera to be put in effectively. So we could look around the corner and we didn't have to pull hard and potentially break teeth. And it's just seems better, and it seems the right thing to do. And I've got to be honest, I thought there was nothing more to say about this. Silly old me. Because about 5 years ago, I remember the debate between Tim Cook and Will Harrop Griffiths. It's on TopMedTalk. It's one of the most downloaded episodes we've ever had. And I thought at the end of that debate, not that Will didn't do an absolutely fantastic job, but I thought it was pretty clear that in the well-resourced world, the first go-to thing would be VL, videolaryngoscopy. Now, Ellen, we sat down for a little pre-chat and you told me, steady on a minute, Monty, that not everyone agrees with you, which isn't unusual, but help us here. That was a long intro, but help us pivot off that.
No, I think it's a very good point you're making, because those of us who are very involved in airway management, I think, have moved on to videolaryngoscopy and do feel it should be or routinely used. We won't use the word universal. And there's been, even since that debate, which I remember and was at, since that debate, there's been lots more evidence of the value or the additional value of using videolaryngoscopy. The Cochrane review, which was published in 2019 originally, and then the update was 2022, we'll talk about in a minute, but that gave us more evidence of the fact that it is, improves your first pass success, less hypoxemia, etc., which we might discuss. But we, on the ground, at these various debates we have, it's still a bit maybe 50-50, 60-40. And that was highlighted by a very recent editorial in Anaesthesia by Craig Lyons and his colleague from Galway. And they're making the point that we might be crossing the Rubicon. And it's caused, again, a further debate because that looked at some of the evidence and saying, it's very, very heterogeneous. Okay, but I personally think one of the problems is the fact that it's not one thing, videolaryngoscopy.
No.
You videolaryngoscopy MAC-like blades, and then you have the hyperangulated blades, and I think that does cause confusion. And although you get good views with both, deploying the tube, which has always been kind of the more difficult bit, is more difficult, and people mingle them together. And I think that might be one of the reasons why there is maybe not a routine uptake. Although we are going in that direction.
I'm guessing pretty much all of us in the well-resourced world have videolaryngoscopy immediately available now.
Yes.
That's what I see around me. And the debate, as I see it, is which one you pick up first. And if you have a range of options available, lucky you. And if you decide to pick the videolaryngoscopy up first and that becomes your primary skill set, I'm struggling to see the problem with that because you've got the alternatives available. Is that about it? Or?
It is probably a bit more than that. I think there's slightly too much choice, perhaps, and people find that confusing. In our department, for instance, we started with one videoscope available, the McGarry videoscope. So everybody became kind of skilled in that, and it's universally available. And we didn't introduce the hyperangulated version till later on, and I think that's important. That's a different skill set.
Yes.
And it is, you have to teach that skill set, and it is different. And there's no point taking that up in anger in a difficult case if you haven't used it before or become skilled at using it.
Just to talk that through very, very briefly, there are multiple podcasts available on TopMedTalk discussing these issues, but the first step that many of us took was to take the tool that we were used to and put a camera on it, so the morphology of the shape of the device was the same and it felt the same and looked the same, and we could use it that way. And then there were alternatives that allow you to get an image with more difficult airways, but the deployment of the tube is quite an extra skill in that one because it's now an unfamiliar placement process. So we won't go deep into that, but that's one of the challenges. So our next guest, Ross, if you would mind introducing yourself for a second, and then we'll get your views on this.
Thanks, Monty. And it's lovely to be here and to chat with you. My name's Ross Hofmeyr. I'm from Cape Town in South Africa, where I work predominantly at Groote Schuur Hospital, and I'm the airway lead for our department, and actually supervise an airway fellowship, airway and thoracic anesthesia, which is the only one of its kind in Africa. And so a lot of my focus is looking at how we can translate what's coming out of the developed world and use that to uplift the African continent.
And what's your current view on this debate, Ross? Because now we're dealing with different sensitivities. Although we complain that we've got no money in the National Health Service, we've got loads of it in reality, taking a global view. You're now reaching decisions where the capital expenditure is a key component of the decision making.
Yeah, and I think that makes us look very, very acutely at the evidence, because if we're going to invest money in a resource-constrained setting, we have to invest money wisely. You ask where I stand on the debate, and I'm with Ellen. In 2023, the evidence is that we should be using videolaryngoscopy wherever it's feasible as a routine procedure. Where it's feasible is more where the rubber meets the road for me. We've actually done a national audit in South Africa. One of my very talented master's students has looked at this, and we've seen in South Africa 80% of operating theatres, just a bit more than 80% of operating theatres, actually do have access to VL, but the utilization is still quite low. And I think that's really where we need to focus, is why are people being slow to move to routine use of VL, and address what the limiting factors and the factors of hesitance are there. Clearly, there are people who don't feel that the all singing, all dancing adoption of universal VL is a good idea. That's why we have these editorials and why we have these discussions. So we need to figure out what are their concerns, and how do we address that, and not just be locked in our own echo chamber of saying it's great, let's go.
And just for clarity, once you have VL available, does that mean that the cost decision about the choices has kind of gone now? Because is there a per case cost decision that's still in play?
Oh, absolutely. And that means we have to think very carefully about which devices we select and what we buy. Because we go from the full spectrum of fully disposable VLs right up to fully reusable VLs, and a lot of space in between where there's disposable components. And the capital cost has to be balanced against the use cost. And then we have the state or state-funded healthcare system, and we have the privately funded healthcare system, very different payment models. And this all has to be taken into account as to what's going to be the best device for the situation.
Ross, we'll come back to you as well, Alan, but now we're going to introduce our third guest, Alistair McNarry. It's great to have you back on TopMedTalk. You've been a very generous contributor.
Great to be here. Thanks, Monty.
We've been into this subject in detail a few times before, and they've been talking about the evidence. So in this conversation, I'm going to refer to you as the evidence, if that's okay. You know what I mean.
Yeah.
There. So an update, Alistair, from your perspective, including the fact you were doing some surveys the last time we spoke. I don't know if they've come in yet and how they've gone.
I think they're due to be posted off this week for publication, so I'll allude to them, but it's really interesting that the airway communities all say, as you said, the debate is finished.
Yes.
It's VL, what's keeping the rest of you?
Yeah.
And I think we have to sort of put our hands up and say, look, we're sorry. We haven't brought the rest of the anaesthetic community with us. We haven't taught effectively. We haven't shown the benefit. And I think it's a bit like an approach to anything. A videolaryngoscope is a tool.
Yes.
It's like a direct laryngoscope. It's a tool. Videolaryngoscope, there's a Cochrane review, the highest level evidence that says videolaryngoscopy is better. Mm-hmm. But we need to show people and tell people and teach people. If you're given a tool to do something that you've never been taught how to use, needless to say, you're not going to use it as most effective. And probably in the airway community, in these couple of days, the discussion has much, much more been about how do we teach effective VL, how do you communicate effectiveness with people, rather than actually saying, should you be using VL or DL?
Yes.
So I think the debate has changed a bit in terms of our education strategy, rather than just saying VL or DL. A talented anaesthetist skilled in DL can intubate many people with a direct laryngoscope.
Yes.
So we actually say, okay, what makes a person talented in DL? Well, practice, rehearsal, good teaching.
Yes.
And actually we need to say, okay, are we giving people the opportunity to practice, to rehearse? Are we giving them good teaching? Are we giving them good direction? Are we giving them proper feedback in their utilization? Because that's what we all had with DL. And it's no surprise, perhaps, that people are used to that sort of level of education with DL. We need to bring the same level of education into VL, and I think then that'll be helpful in terms of people getting the hang of it. Because if I give you a tool and say, this is better, and I always use the analogy of a Bugatti Veyron versus a Fiat 500.
Yes.
Most of us could drive a Fiat 500 from A to B.
Yes.
If you gave me a Bugatti Veyron, I'd probably crash it.
By the way, for those of you who aren't familiar, that's a very fast and very expensive motor car.
Yes, that's the one.
That's so fast and so expensive, it's hard to drive without hitting things.
And I think it's a joke, I know, but it's the idea that actually...
I'm with you.
Here we have a super tool, but if we haven't taught you how to use it...
So I think what I'm hearing here, and there are two communities involved here. There's the people who deal routinely with difficult airways as part of their daily work. That means they're trying to secure the airway in people who have significant deformities or challenges that makes it technically very challenging, and they make that look easy by using additional devices and techniques. And then there's the vast majority of the rest of us. I've retired relatively recently, but I'll still call us for now, who would be providing general anaesthesia with the use of an airway to provide positive pressure ventilation through, for example, an endotracheal tube on a daily basis. And we used to pick up the non-VL thing. Now the suggestion is that we should all be picking up the VL thing first as the standard of care, and that's what we should train the young.
But there's a caveat to that.
Right.
And that is only if you've been taught what to do with it.
So I was going to go on to say the challenge of many generations would be, look, I've got no problem with my non-VL thing. This is a bit like the echo argument for central lines, or if you have to do transesophageal echo to be a cardiac anaesthesia. I've been doing this for decades. I don't have a problem, which actually means I very rarely have a problem.
Yeah.
But so please leave me alone, because I'm retiring in the next 10 years and I really don't want to spend my time relearning a new skill. Whereas I think what you're saying is that we should all accept the fact that it's a core skill, so it's okay for us all to accept the fact we need to do a bit of retraining or refreshing. Is that a fair summary?
I think that the message is much clearer than that. Don't expect to be good at VL if you haven't thought about. And it's not it's not very much to learn.
Yes.
But actually, there's a bit of thought about what you're doing with VL. Rather, DL was easy. You're trying to make a line of sight from. I mean, you listening online, you can't see me pointing at my eye, but you're making a line of sight from your eye to the larynx.
Yes.
You've got to stop and think, what's a VL doing for me that's different?
Yes.
And once you've actually looked at that question, there's much of the detail is now dealt with. Because it's a different way of looking. You're not looking directly, you're not trying to make a line of sight, you're trying to go around a corner and see indirectly.
Okay, so Ellen, what's the conclusion about the next steps? Because it sounds as though we're, at least in this group here, we've got some agreement, that although there's still some debates. It's getting us, those of us who are enthusiastic to travel the new journey, how do we get ourselves skilled up?
I kind of agree with Alistair. I think now it's education. And interesting, you mentioned, the person who's using the DL for up to 20 years, like you and me maybe. We're very good at it and we don't want to change. But Alistair has done some work showing that it's not always the experienced people who are slower to adapt. It's even the more junior.
Okay.
And I would say in our country where we have a national training program so people move about, which we think is a great strength of it, from hospital to hospital, centre to centre, they will be faced with kind of different VLs, because that's the nature of the beast. There are a number out there, and they're the only ubiquitous technique they will learn is DL, maybe with the normal scope. So that's a kind of default a little bit, particularly for moving about. So what I think it behoves us to, and I'm doing it more now, teach DL technique with your VL.
Yes.
You can actually look down and get a view. So every trainee I feel should be able to do a DL with their VL shaped videoscope. They can look down directly, so we can turn the screen round or cover up the screen and teach them that. So they the kind of this one versus the other goes away, because you can do both with the one VL. And we're teaching that a lot more. We're keeping the hyperangulated teaching to the second step. And I think that's where we will win, I think, by saying this is actually just like your DL, but you have a better screen, much better human factors when you're teaching your trainees. You can see it, they can see it. And it's not that business of looking over their shoulder when you're teaching trainees. And then, as we get a bit older, our eyesight isn't so good. The picture is so much better. And now we're teaching our assistants to confirm the intubation with us. They can see the tube going through the cords, and this human factor advantage is becoming huge, particularly now since we've just published guidelines on preventing unrecognised esophageal intubation.
Okay.
And the big thing there is that we do a double check, our assistant sort of confirming with us the tube is through the cords. This kind of precision intubation we're talking about it.
And remind us who the we is here.
The we is PUMA. It's a group of anaesthetists from around the world, 4 continents in fact, who've got together to look. First of all, we got together to kind of unify messages from all the guidelines that are out there. But we got a bit sidetracked on this issue because there's been a few high-profile deaths from unrecognised esophageal intubation in the UK. There was particularly the radiographer that died. And based on that, we were asked to develop guidelines to prevent unrecognised esophageal intubation, which have been published. And there, one of our recommendations is that we should use VL.
Yes.
And that we should verbalise confirmation of VL with our assistant. So that's one of the 11 recommendations, which I think is very important.
So now, if I'm out there and I'm feeling guilted into making the change...
But not if you haven't been taught, Monty. Don't do it through guilt. Get someone to teach you first.
So I'm going to ask Alistair in a second.
Sorry.
And therefore I'm going to make the change. As part of that, I want to be taught. Okay. Where should I quietly go to, and where should I look, and how should I get taught to do better? And because there's an element of potential. I mean, shame's the wrong word, but you know what I mean. I'm feeling guilty. And now the walk of shame. to join the youngsters for the training, whatever it is. I'm overstating all of this, Alistair, just to make a point. But,
Yeah, no, I think it's a very good point, and,
Yeah.
and I had to do that with ultrasound and various other things. Absolutely. But you said availability is good now. It is.
Well, yeah.
I think I would be surprised if most departments don't have it either locked away, but they will have a VL available. And I would hope that in most departments you have an airway lead, or at least someone
Yes,
with an interest in airway management, and you do sidle up to them and say, I'm in theatre today, I want to use this, and
Okay.
ask them to come along with you. And I think they'll realise not only is it the same technique as the DL,
Yes.
assuming you're not using a hyperambulated one, and then they'll see the advantage of the screen, and they see that as I said, you don't have to put your glasses on. You get a very
Yes.
good view, and our colleagues have been quite good to come along with it. But when they first came out, you see, the original, say for instance, McGraw was hyperangulated slightly.
Yes.
There wasn't that kind of definition between DL shape and hyperangulated. Now there is.
Okay.
So the majority are using the Mac shaped video. Yeah, and you have all the advantages
DL.
of that. Then if you want to go to the hyperangulated blade for difficult cases or at another skill, you can learn that, but that's another step.
And if prior to asking that question, having that direct support, are there online resources where I can start to take the edge off that first?
That's a
Two steps.
very good point. There are workshops, but I don't think we've been good enough at doing online resources.
I'm guessing
Sorry.
Africa will have led the way in doing this.
Well, I just want to put a quick plug in for openairway.org, which is
Okay.
an open access airway education resource.
Open Airway on all one word.
Openairway.org.
.org.
And there's a lot of training material there. It is coming from Africa with a focus on the continent, but actually gets a lot of web traffic from Europe and North America as well. So clearly they're finding it handy. And there's free open access education content there on a lot of these topics. So.
And lower fidelity simulation, is that any use at all?
So are you asking about low fidelity or low technology?
Low
'Cause
technology.
You can achieve
then,
high
yeah.
fidelity
High
simulation.
fidelity, low technology.
Yeah,
There we go.
absolutely, and that's something which we use quite a lot, and it actually ties into what Ellen is talking about. In fact, we've been doing outreach teaching and inreach teaching using, and I want to drop this VL versus DL debate
Yes.
completely, and I want to talk about using video-equipped laryngoscopy.
Okay.
Using Macintosh bladed devices which have video on them, where we can train people on laryngoscopy and
Okay.
develop really good skills. How did you learn, Monty? You had somebody leaning over your shoulder, it might have been Macintosh himself, saying, can you see the chords, can you see the chords, can you see the chords? And now we have a device where everybody in the room can see. And so I have the medical student picking up the Macintosh bladed videolaryngoscope.
Yes.
Performing an intubation, I can assist them in learning the skill, correcting their technique in real time. Everyone else in the room, the 4 other students, are all able to see the process.
Right.
And so we are actually accelerating the training in laryngoscopy and good skills from the beginning by using video-equipped devices.
Alistair.
I think that's the thing. It has moved on from this great DLVL thing to actually how do we teach people to get the best out of a videolaryngoscope?
Yes.
And in my institution, I kind of use 3 questions to all of my trainees, whatever device they pick up. How was the blade facilitating your view of the larynx?
Yes.
Because you can ask that of a DL or a VL, and of course the answer is we never did ask it of a DL. We just said, "Can you see it yet? Can you see?" If you're facilitating the view of the larynx by using the blade, how do I get my tube
Yes.
to follow the blade? And finally, how do I get my tube to go through the chords? Because that's actually what we're using the device for. But if you break it down into those 3 steps, as I said at the start, I sort of feel a bit guilty. The airway community have done the wrong thing because we haven't challenged people about how we teach laryngoscopy.
Yes.
As Ross said, is that can you see yet? Can you see yet? That's not really teaching. That's kind of, can you guess what you're going to do next? And we have a responsibility to educate. Because once you start educating people on those sort of 3 questions, whether you're using a DL or a Macintosh-like VL or a hyperangulated VL, you're starting to think, how do I need to use this tool differently to actually do what I want to do, which is deliver oxygen down the pipe?
Okay, so some concluding comments. I think we've all concluded. Education, 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 which is, I think it's always a great conclusion. I'm a bit worried about continuing to try and get more and more evidence, if you see what I mean, because it sounds to me like, okay, we can do some real world evidence now, and we've reached a point whereby putting that energy and money into education sounds like a better idea to me. Personal view. There we go. But Ellen, closing comments, and I'll go around the room.
I agree with you. I think we have the evidence now. I think it behoves us as the airway leads within our departments and within our countries to improve our education and training.
Great. Ross?
Yeah, I'm going to agree that the evidence is clear. What we need to be focusing on is the finer tuning. What is going to be the best for access? What is going to be the best for containing our resources and the scarcity thereof? And how are we going to move this transition in a safe way?
Alistair?
I think everyone else has said it to me, but I want to sell videolaryngoscopy as a useful tool.
Yes.
Because once you've worked out what you're doing with the blade, you'll discover you can do this in awake patients. And our trainees from year dot have been complaining they don't do enough awake intubations with a flexible bronchoscope.
Yes.
If you've learned how to use it,
Yes.
and been taught how to use a videoscope,
Yes.
you can do awake intubations with a videoscope. So you're actually skilling yourself up for the future. And I think if we start selling videolaryngoscopy as a real potential, a good tool that you need to learn how to use and get familiar with, we'll go much further than kind of just arguing with each other about what's the best device.
Great. Well, what a wonderful discussion. We may come back and discuss this again. Maybe we'll come back and discuss how successfully the education went and why we don't have to talk about it anymore, or how it's worked out in the rest of the world. But have a wonderful rest of the meeting. Thank you very much for giving your time very generously. EdPom is free open access medical education. We've got nearly 2,000 podcasts now accumulated over the last 5 years. We're just on 2 million downloads in over 100 countries, and the only reason we can keep it free open access is because the speakers and the contributors all do it for free. They give their time very generously. And then we use donations and, in particular, unrestricted grants from industry sponsors like Medtronic, Edwards Life Sciences, and GE Healthcare. Today we're sitting here on the Medtronic stand. We've been discussing video laryngoscopy with 3 wonderful guests who are now going to go and enjoy the rest of the meeting. If you want to catch up with us, you'll find us more on www.topmedtalk.com, your regular podcatchers, and all over social media. Thank you very much for listening. TopMedTalk.
Thanks for downloading TopMedTalk. Don't forget to subscribe via your podcatcher. Don't forget to check us out on social media. We're on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. And also, don't forget, TopMedTalk is the broadcasting arm of EdPom, evidence-based perioperative medicine. We'd love you to find out more about that. If you check out edpom.org, you can find low prices on some of the conferences we're organising around the world. Many of them are virtual and don't even involve you leaving your own home. Check out edpom.org now.